Get out! This place isn't for your kind. The words sliced through the marble lobby of Seattle's Horizon Grand Hotel, like a blade, delivered with casual cruelty by a man in a press suit who believes his authority is absolute. A black woman in jeans and a plain t-shirt stands at the front desk, her reservation confirmation on her phone, her expression unnervingly calm. The manager doesn't ask questions. The clerks don't verify. They see what they want to see, and what they decide doesn't belong. Within minutes, her premium card is locked in a safe like stolen property. Security is summoned for a fraud alert, and phones across the lobby rise to capture what happens next. But Graham Voss, Britt Hayes, and Kieran Patel have no idea who they're humiliating. And when the truth detonates, it won't just end careers. It will expose a rot that's been protected for years. Before we go further, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The sliding glass doors of the Horizon Grand Hotel whispered open at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, admitting a woman who did not look like she belonged. That was the first thing Graham Voss noticed. He stood behind the gleaming front desk with his shoulders squared and his name tag polished, surveying the lobby the way a general might survey a battlefield. The Horizon Grand was his domain. 23 floors of imported marble, waterfall fixtures, and guests who understood that luxury required a certain appearance, a certain comportment, a certain class. Graham had worked hospitality for 19 years, climbing from bellhop to front desk manager, and he prided himself on being able to read people the moment they crossed the threshold. The woman who entered wore faded jeans, white sneakers that had seen better days, and a plain gray t-shirt that hung loose over her frame. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She carried no luggage, no designer handbag, no visible jewelry beyond a slim watch on her wrist. She moved through the lobby without hesitation, her stride easy and unhurried, as if she had every right to be there. Graham's jaw tightened. Beside him, Britt Hayes, a blonde woman in her late 20s with razor-sharp eyeliner and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, leaned closer and murmured, "Do we need to call someone?" "Not yet," Graham said quietly. "Let's see what she wants." Kieran Patel, the third clerk on duty, glanced up from his computer screen, his expression flickering between curiosity and unease. He was newer to the team, only 6 months in, and still learning the unspoken rules that governed the Horizon Grand's front desk. Rules like, don't waste time on people who can't afford to be here. The woman approached the desk with the same calm confidence she'd carried through the door. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze sweeping across the three of them before settling on Graham. "Good afternoon," she said. Her voice was warm, steady, unhurried. "I have a reservation. Name is Nyla Grant." Graham didn't move. He didn't reach for the keyboard. He didn't smile. "A reservation," he repeated, his tone flat. "Yes," Nyla said. She pulled her phone from her pocket and turned the screen toward him, displaying a confirmation email. "Penthouse suite. 2 weeks. Check in today." Britt let out a breath that might have been a laugh. She exchanged a glance with Graham, and something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding, a mutual recognition of what was happening here. Graham's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake." Nyla's eyebrows lifted slightly. "A mistake?" "The penthouse suites are reserved well in advance," Graham said, his voice taking on the practiced patience of someone explaining something simple to someone slow. "They require a significant deposit and verification of payment. I'm sure you understand." "I do understand," Nyla said evenly, "which is why I made the reservation 3 months ago and provided full payment at the time of booking." Graham still didn't touch the computer. "Can I see some identification?" Nyla reached into her back pocket and produced a driver's license and a sleek black credit card. Premium tier, the kind that came with concierge services and no spending limit. She placed both on the counter and slid them toward Graham. He picked up the license first, studying it with exaggerated care. His eyes flicked from the photo to Nyla's face and back again, as if searching for discrepancies. Then he set it down and lifted the credit card, turning it over in his hands like a jeweler inspecting a fake diamond. "This is interesting," he said slowly. "What is?" Nyla asked. "Well," Graham said, setting the card down with deliberate precision, "we've had some issues lately with fraudulent reservations. People using stolen cards, fake IDs, that sort of thing. I'm sure you can appreciate that we have to be careful. Nyla's expression didn't shift. I can appreciate that, which is why I'm standing here with valid identification and a legitimate reservation. Britt leaned forward, resting her elbows on the counter. Do you have any other form of ID, maybe a passport, something with a little more credibility? The word hung in the air like smoke. Nyla's gaze moved to Britt, holding there for a long beat. My driver's license is a valid form of identification issued by the state of Washington. It has my name, my photo, and my address. What additional credibility do you need? Britt's smile thinned. I'm just trying to help you, ma'am. If there's been some kind of misunderstanding, there hasn't been, Nyla said. I have a reservation. I'd like to check in. Graham picked up the phone on the desk and pressed a button. Marisol, can you come to the front desk, please? A minute later, a young woman in a burgundy blazer appeared from a side office. Marisol Vega was 24, with dark eyes that held a sharpness her soft voice didn't always convey. She'd been working as a concierge at the Horizon Grand for 2 years, and she'd learned early that survival in this place required knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Yes, Mr. Voss, she said. Graham gestured toward Nyla without looking at her. Can you pull up the reservation for Nyla Grant? Penthouse Suite. Marisol moved to the computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. A few seconds later, her expression shifted, just a flicker, barely noticeable, but there. It's here, she said quietly. Graham's head snapped toward her. What? The reservation, Marisol repeated, her voice careful. It's in the system. Penthouse Suite, 2 weeks, full payment received 3 months ago. Everything checks out. Britt leaned over to look at the screen, her eyes narrowing. That doesn't make sense. It's right here, Marisol said, tapping the monitor. Graham's jaw worked. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned back to Nyla. His expression had hardened, the veneer of professionalism cracking to reveal something colder underneath. Listen, he said, his voice dropping lower. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this hotel has standards. We cater to a certain clientele, people who understand what it means to stay in a place like this. He gestured vaguely at her clothing. You walk in here looking like that and expect us to hand over a penthouse key? That's not how this works. Nyla didn't flinch. How does it work exactly? We have the right to refuse service, Graham said. If we believe there's a question of legitimacy, or if we feel a guest doesn't meet our standards, we can decline the reservation. Standards, Nyla repeated, her tone utterly neutral. That's right, Graham said. Now I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you have any other identification, any other credit cards, anything that proves you're who you say you are and that you can actually afford to be here? Nyla studied him for a moment. Then she glanced at Britt, then at Kieran, who had gone very still and very pale. Finally, her gaze returned to Graham. I've given you my identification, she said. I've shown you my reservation. What I'm hearing is that none of that matters because of how I'm dressed. Graham's mouth tightened. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Across the lobby, a few guests had begun to notice the exchange. A couple near the concierge desk glanced over, their conversation trailing off. A man in a business suit paused by the elevators, his phone in hand but his attention shifting toward the front desk. Britt straightened, her smile gone entirely now. Ma'am, I think it's time for you to leave. I'm not leaving, Nyla said calmly. I have a reservation. I've paid for it. I'm checking in. Graham reached across the desk and picked up Nyla's credit card again. This time, he didn't examine it. He held it up between 2 fingers like a piece of evidence. Kieran, he said, his voice sharp, take this card and lock it in the safe. We'll need to verify it with the issuing bank before we proceed. Kieran hesitated, his eyes darting between Graham and Nyla. Sir, the system already— Do it, Graham snapped. Kieran swallowed hard, then took the card from Graham's hand. He disappeared into the back office. Nyla's expression remained serene, but something in her eyes had shifted, something glacial and absolute. You're confiscating my credit card? We're securing company property until we can confirm its validity, Graham said. It's not company property, Nyla said. It's mine. That remains to be seen. Britt reached for the intercom button on the desk and pressed it. Her voice echoed through the lobby's overhead speakers, crisp and authoritative. Security to the front desk. Fraud alert. Security to the front desk. The lobby went quiet. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Guests froze mid-step, their gazes locking onto the woman in the gray t-shirt standing at the counter, facing down 3 hotel employees who looked at her like she was a criminal. Neela didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her hands resting loosely at her sides, her breathing even and controlled. But her eyes, dark, sharp, unflinching, stayed locked on Graham. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "I don't think so," Graham replied. Marisol stood a few feet away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her face pale. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Graham stepped out from behind the desk, positioning himself between Nyla and the elevators. "I'm going to need you to wait over there," he said, pointing toward a cluster of chairs near the entrance. "Security will escort you out once they arrive." Nyla tilted her head slightly. "And if I refuse?" "Then we'll have a problem," Graham said. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now, a warning, a promise. The sliding doors opened again, and 2 figures entered the lobby. The first was a young woman with bright pink hair and a camera rig strapped to her chest. Sienna Park, a travel vlogger with 3 million subscribers who documented high-end hotels and luxury experiences. The second was a man in his early 30s with a trimmed beard and a phone mounted on a handheld gimbal, Jace Rowan, a live streamer known for his unfiltered urban exploration content. Both of them stopped the moment they saw the scene unfolding at the front desk. Sienna's eyes widened. She glanced at Jace, who was already lifting his phone, angling the camera toward the confrontation. "Are you seeing this?" Jace murmured into his mic, his voice low but audible. His screen lit up with a flood of comments as viewers began tuning in. Graham didn't notice. His attention was entirely on Nyla. "Ma'am," he said again, louder now. "I'm not going to ask you again. Move away from the desk." Nyla didn't budge. "I'm not going anywhere until I check into the room I've paid for." Britt's hand hovered over the intercom button again. "Should I call the police?" "Not yet," Graham said. "Let's give security a chance to handle this." 2 uniformed security guards emerged from a side corridor, moving quickly but not running. The first was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a crew cut and a radio clip to his belt. The second was younger, leaner, with a nervous energy that made him glance around the lobby as if expecting something to go wrong. Graham gestured toward Nyla. "We have a situation. This woman is refusing to leave after being asked multiple times. I need you to escort her out." The older guard stepped forward, his expression neutral but his posture firm. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Nyla turned to face him, and for the first time since she'd entered the building, something like exhaustion flickered across her features, just for a moment, then gone. "I have a reservation," she said, her voice quieter now but no less steady. "I've shown my ID, I've shown my credit card, I've done everything I'm supposed to do, and I'm being treated like a criminal because of how I'm dressed." The guard hesitated. His gaze shifted to Graham, then back to Nyla. "Is that true? Does she have a reservation?" Graham's mouth opened, but Marisol spoke first. "Yes," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silence of the lobby, it carried. "She does. It's in the system. Everything's valid." Every eye in the room turned to her. Graham's face flushed dark red. "Marisol." "I'm sorry, Mr. Voss," Marisol said, her voice trembling now but her words clear. "But it's the truth. Her reservation is legitimate. The payment went through. There's no fraud, there's no problem, except the one we're creating." Britt's eyes blazed. "You need to stay in your lane, Marisol." "I'm just telling you what's in the system," Marisol said. Graham took a step toward her, his voice dropping to a hiss. "If you want to keep working here, you'll keep your mouth shut." Marisol flinched, but she didn't back down. "She has a reservation," she repeated. Across the lobby, Sienna had her camera fully activated now, the red recording light glowing. Jace's live stream chat was exploding, hundreds of comments per second, viewers demanding to know what was happening, who the woman was, why she was being treated this way. The older security guard looked deeply uncomfortable. "Sir, if the reservation is legitimate, I'll decide what's legitimate, Graham snapped. He turned back to Nyla, and his voice turned cold, venomous. People like you always try to pull something like this. You think you can throw around a stolen card and a fake name and we'll just roll over. But this isn't that kind of place. This hotel is for people who earn their way here, people who belong, and you— He gestured at her again, his hand sweeping up and down. You don't. The words landed like stones. Nyla's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted, something sharp and final, like the moment before a storm breaks. People like me, she repeated softly. That's right, Graham said. Now, get out. Britt stepped forward, reaching for Nyla's arm. That was the moment the line was crossed. Britt's fingers closed around Nyla's wrist, gripping tight, and she gave a sharp tug as if to pull her toward the door. The lobby collectively inhaled. Sienna's cameras zoomed in. Jace's live stream exploded with outrage. The security guards moved forward, uncertain whether to intervene or assist, and Nyla Grant, standing in the center of it all with her wrist caught in another woman's hand, finally moved. She didn't jerk away. She didn't raise her voice. She simply turned her head, met Britt's eyes, and said very clearly, "Let go of me." Britt hesitated, her grip loosening just a fraction. Nyla pulled her arm free with a smooth, controlled motion. Then she reached into her pocket, withdrew her phone, and swiped to her contacts. She tapped a name, held the phone to her ear. The lobby was silent except for the faint sound of ringing on the other end of the line. Someone picked up. Nyla didn't say hello. She didn't introduce herself. She just spoke, her voice calm and even and devastatingly clear. "This is Nyla Grant. I'm standing in the lobby of the Horizon Grand Seattle. I need an immediate executive lockdown on 3 employee profiles: Graham Voss, Britt Hayes, Kiran Patel. Terminate access effective immediately, and pull the security footage from the last 30 minutes. I want it archived and flagged for legal review." She paused. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "And someone needs to unlock the safe. My card is in there, and I'd like it back." She ended the call. Graham stared at her, his face blank with confusion. "What are you—" Nyla slipped her phone back into her pocket. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. And when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of something irreversible. "This lobby belongs to me," she said. Silence. Graham's mouth opened. No sound came out. Britt went white. Kiran, emerging from the back office with the safe key in his hand, froze in the doorway. Marisol's eyes went wide. And across the lobby, Sienna whispered into her camera, her voice barely audible. "Oh my God. She's the owner." Nyla Grant wasn't a guest. She was the founder and CEO of Horizon Hotels, one of the largest boutique luxury chains on the West Coast, with properties in 14 cities and a reputation for impeccable service. She had walked into her own hotel dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, carrying no luggage, displaying no outward signs of wealth or power. And she had been humiliated, dismissed, and physically grabbed by her own employees. Graham's face drained of color. His hands began to shake. "Miss Grant," he stammered. I didn't— "You didn't know who I was," Nyla finished for him. Her voice was perfectly calm, perfectly steady. "That's the point." Britt took a stumbling step backward. We were just following protocol." "No," Nyla said. "You were making assumptions. You saw someone who didn't look the way you thought they should, and you decided they didn't belong. You didn't verify. You didn't ask questions. You didn't treat me like a human being." She turned to Kiran, who still stood frozen in the doorway. "My card, please." Kieran's hands fumbled with the key. He opened the safe, retrieved the black credit card, and walked it over to Nyla with the careful precision of someone defusing a bomb. He set it on the counter in front of her, then backed away. Nyla picked up the card and slipped it into her pocket. Then she retrieved her driver's license and did the same. Graham was shaking his head now, his mouth working soundlessly. "Ms. Grant, please, there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "There hasn't been a misunderstanding," Nyla said. "You understood perfectly. You just didn't think I deserved respect." Britt's voice cracked. "We didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Nyla said. "That's the problem." She pulled out her phone again and made another call. "Daniel," she said when someone answered, "I need you to initiate a full internal review of the Seattle property. Audit every complaint filed in the last 3 years. Cross-reference it with employee disciplinary records. I want to know if this is an isolated incident or part of a pattern." She listened for a moment. "No," she said. "Don't wait. Start now." She ended the call and turned back to Graham, Britt, and Kieran. Her gaze swept over them one by one, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but absolute. "You're done," she said. "All 3 of you. Your employment with Horizon Hotels is terminated effective immediately. Your access badges are deactivated. Your final paychecks will be mailed to you. And if you ever want to work in hospitality again, I suggest you think very carefully about what you've learned here today." Graham's legs buckled. He grabbed the edge of the desk to steady himself. "Please," he whispered. "Please, Ms. Grant. I have a family." "So do a lot of people," Nyla said. "People who come into this lobby every day and get treated the way you just treated me. People who don't have the power to fire you on the spot." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with dignity. You just needed to be a decent person. And you chose not to be." Britt was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry." Nyla didn't respond. She turned to the security guards. "Please escort these 3 off the property. Make sure they don't take anything that doesn't belong to them." The older guard nodded, his expression grim. He gestured toward the door. "Let's go." Graham, Britt, and Kieran moved like sleepwalkers, their faces pale and slack. The lobby watched in stunned silence as they were led toward the exit, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. And then Nyla turned to Marisol. The young concierge stood very still, her hands still clasped in front of her, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "You told the truth," Nyla said. Marisol swallowed hard. I couldn't." "You risked your job," Nyla said, "when it would have been easier to stay quiet. That took courage." Marisol's breath hitched. "I didn't want to be part of it." Nyla studied her for a long moment. Then she said, "How would you feel about a promotion?" Marisol blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You're the new front desk manager," Nyla said. "Effective immediately. You'll report directly to the Seattle Regional Director, and you'll be responsible for rebuilding the culture at this property." She paused. "Interested?" Marisol's eyes widened. Yes, absolutely." "Good," Nyla said. "We'll talk details tomorrow. For now, I need you to check me into my penthouse suite." Marisol nodded quickly and moved behind the desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard. A minute later, she handed Nyla a key card with a trembling smile. "Welcome to the Horizon Grand, Miss Grant," she said softly. Nyla took the card and smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "Thank you, Marisol." She turned and walked toward the elevators. The crowd parted to let her through. Sienna's camera followed her every step. Jace's live stream chat was a wall of fire emojis and shocked commentary. But Nyla didn't look back. She stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the penthouse, and as the doors began to slide shut, she finally allowed herself a long, slow breath. The doors closed, and the lobby exploded. Guests rushed forward, voices overlapping, phones recording, everyone talking at once. Sienna turned her camera on herself, her face flushed with excitement. "You guys, I don't even know how to process what we just witnessed." Jace was already editing the clip for maximum viral impact. His screen showed the moment Britt grabbed Nyla's wrist, the moment Nyla made the call, the moment Graham's face went white. Marisol stood behind the desk, her hands still shaking, her mind racing. She had just been promoted. She had just watched 3 people lose their jobs. She had just stood up to her boss in front of a lobby full of witnesses. And somewhere above her, in a penthouse suite with a view of the Seattle skyline, Nyla Grant stood at the window and looked out at the city she had built her empire in, a city that had just learned something it should have known all along. Respect isn't about what you wear. It's about who you choose to be when no one's watching. And when someone is watching, when the cameras are rolling and the whole world is paying attention, it's too late to pretend you are ever anything other than exactly what you are. The elevator doors opened on the 23rd floor, and Nyla Grant stepped into a hallway lined with soft lighting and original artwork that cost more per piece than most people earned in a year. The penthouse suite waited at the end of the corridor, its double doors polished to a mirror shine. She swiped her keycard, heard the lock disengage with a quiet click, and pushed the doors open. The suite spread before her like a photograph from an architecture magazine, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Seattle skyline, a marble kitchen island stocked with complimentary champagne, a living area decorated in cream and slate gray tones that whispered wealth without shouting it. Neela set her phone on the counter, kicked off her sneakers, and walked to the window. From up here, the city looked peaceful, orderly, the kind of place where systems worked and people were treated fairly, and justice wasn't something you had to fight for in a hotel lobby while strangers recorded you on their phones. She knew better. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up and saw a flood of notifications, texts, emails, missed calls. The first message was from Daniel Reese, her chief operating officer, a man who had worked beside her for 12 years and knew when to ask questions and when to just execute orders. Footage archived, legal standing by, 3 terminations processed. Seattle Regional Director is freaking out. What do you need from me? Neela typed back quickly. Full audit. Every property. I want to know if Seattle is an outlier or a symptom. She hit send, then scrolled through the rest of her messages. Most were from executives and regional directors who had heard what happened and were scrambling to reassure her that their properties would never tolerate such behavior. A few were from board members asking if she needed anything. One was from her younger sister, Maya, who had seen the live stream and sent a single sentence. You okay? Nyla replied, I'm fine. Talk tomorrow. She wasn't fine, but she would be. She set the phone down again and walked into the bedroom, where a king-size bed waited beneath a chandelier that cost more than her first car. She sat on the edge of the mattress, her hands resting on her knees, and allowed herself 1 full minute of stillness. 1 minute to feel the exhaustion that had been building since the moment Graham Voss told her she didn't belong. Then the minute was up, and she stood, because there was work to do. Downstairs, the lobby had transformed into something between a press conference and a crime scene. Guests clustered in small groups, their voices low and urgent, replaying what they had witnessed. Sienna Park had moved to a corner near the concierge desk and was filming a follow-up video, her face flushed with the kind of adrenaline that comes from stumbling into a story that will define your platform for months. I've been covering luxury travel for 5 years, she said into her camera, her voice breathless and sharp. I've stayed in hundreds of hotels, and I have never seen anything like what just happened here. A woman walks into her own hotel and gets treated like a criminal because of how she's dressed, and when she reveals who she is, 3 people lose their jobs on the spot. No second chances, no apologies accepted, just done. She paused, glancing toward the front desk where Marisol now stood alone, her face pale but composed. And the only employee who told the truth? She got promoted. That's not just accountability. That's a message. Across the lobby, Jace Rowan was still streaming. His viewer count had exploded. Over 40,000 people watching live, the chat scrolling so fast it was almost unreadable. He angled his phone toward the elevators, where the doors had just opened to reveal a man in his 50s with silver hair and a suit that fit like it had been sewn directly onto his body. His face was tight with barely controlled panic. That's Richard Calloway, Jace murmured to his audience, Seattle Regional Director, and he looks like he's about to throw up. Richard Calloway crossed the lobby in long strides, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Marisol. He reached the front desk and leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. Where is she? Marisol straightened. Ms. Grant checked into the penthouse suite about 20 minutes ago. Did she say anything else? Just that she wanted the footage archived and legal standing by. Richard closed his eyes briefly, as if praying for strength. This is a disaster. Well, it didn't have to be, Marisol said quietly. Richard's eyes snapped open. Excuse me? She had a legitimate reservation, Marisol said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She showed her ID. She showed her card. Everything was valid. If Mr. Voss had just checked her in, none of this would have happened. Richard stared at her for a long moment. Then he straightened, adjusting his tie. How long have you worked here? 2 years. And you've been promoted to front desk manager as of tonight? Yes, sir. Richard's expression was unreadable. Then I suggest you start acting like it. This property is about to be under a microscope, and I need staff who can hold it together under pressure. Can you do that? Marisol met his gaze. Yes, sir. I can. Good, Richard said, because the next 72 hours are going to determine whether this hotel survives or becomes a cautionary tale. He glanced toward the elevators. I'm going up to speak with Ms. Grant. If anyone asks where I am, tell them I'm handling it. He turned and walked away before Marisol could respond. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt longer than it should have. Richard stood with his back against the wall, his hands clasped in front of him, his mind racing through every possible conversation that was about to happen. He had worked for Horizon Hotels for 8 years, climbing from property manager to regional director, and in all that time he had never once spoken directly to Nyla Grant. She was a figure who existed mostly in emails and quarterly reports, brilliant, exacting, and utterly unreachable. Until tonight. The doors opened. Richard stepped into the hallway and walked to the penthouse suite. He raised his hand to knock, hesitated, then knocked anyway. The door opened almost immediately. Nyla Grant stood in the doorway, still wearing her jeans and t-shirt, her expression calm and unreadable. She looked at Richard for a moment, then stepped aside. Come in, she said. Richard entered and the door closed behind him with a soft click. The suite was pristine, untouched except for a pair of sneakers by the door and a phone on the kitchen counter. Nyla walked to the living area and gestured toward the couch. Sit. Richard sat. Nyla remained standing, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. You're Richard Calloway, she said, Seattle Regional Director. You've been with Horizon for 8 years. Your performance reviews are solid. Your properties run smoothly. You've never had a major incident on your watch. Richard swallowed. Until tonight. Until tonight, Nyla agreed. She walked to the window, her back to him. Tell me what you know. Richard took a breath. I got a call about 30 minutes ago from one of the front desk staff at the Horizon Grand Portland. They'd seen the live stream, said there was a situation here and I needed to get to the property immediately. By the time I arrived, the footage was already going viral. Sienna Park has over 3 million subscribers. Jace Rowan's stream hit 50,000 viewers. The hotel's phone lines are flooded. Our social media is on fire. And Graham Voss? Nyla asked, still facing the window. Richard hesitated. He's been with the company for 4 years, promoted to front desk manager 2 years ago. No formal complaints on file. Nyla turned to face him, and her expression was sharp enough to cut. No formal complaints? Or no complaints that were taken seriously? Richard's throat tightened. I don't know. You should, Nyla said. That's your job. Yes, ma'am. Nyla walked closer, her gaze never leaving his. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pull every complaint filed at this property in the last 3 years. Not just the ones that were escalated. All of them. Guest complaints. Employee complaints. Maintenance requests that got ignored. Accessibility issues that were dismissed. Every single piece of feedback that someone thought was worth documenting. Richard nodded quickly. I'll have it compiled by tomorrow. You'll have it compiled by tomorrow morning, Nyla corrected. 6 a.m. on my desk. She gestured toward the suite. I'll be working from here for the next 2 weeks. And while I'm here, I'm going to watch how this hotel operates when it thinks no one's paying attention. Richard's pulse quickened. Ms. Grant, I assure you, what happened tonight is not representative of... How do you know? Nyla interrupted. Were you standing in the lobby when your front desk manager told a black woman she didn't belong here? Were you there when your staff locked her credit card in a safe and called security to remove her? Were you there when one of your clerks grabbed her arm and tried to drag her out? Richard's face went pale. No, ma'am. Then you don't know what's representative, Nyla said. That's the problem. She walked past him and opened the door. A clear dismissal. 6 a.m., Richard. Don't be late. Richard stood, his legs unsteady. He walked to the door, then paused. Ms. Grant, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. Nyla looked at him, and for just a moment, something like exhaustion flickered in her eyes. So am I, she said quietly. But sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Actions do. Richard nodded and left. The door closed behind him, and Nyla stood alone in the suite once more. She walked back to the window and looked out at the city, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Somewhere out there, Graham Voss, Britt Hayes, and Kiran Patel were processing the fact that their lives had just imploded. Somewhere out there, guests were posting reviews and sharing videos and debating whether Horizon hotels deserved a second chance. Somewhere out there, people who had been dismissed and humiliated and told they didn't belong were watching the footage and wondering if anything would actually change. Nyla pulled out her phone and made one more call. "Daniel," she said when he answered, "I need you to set up a task force, diversity audit, complaint review, employee training overhaul. I want recommendations on my desk in 72 hours. "Consider it done," Daniel said. "Anything else?" Nyla hesitated. Then she said, "Find out if there are any other properties where this kind of behavior has been reported. I want to know if Seattle is the only place where my staff thinks they can treat people like this." "You think it's not?" Daniel asked carefully. "I think we built something," Nyla said, her voice quiet and hard, "and I think some people forgot what it was supposed to stand for." She ended the call and sat on the couch, her head tipped back against the cushions. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She just sat, thinking about the hotel she had founded 15 years ago in a renovated warehouse in Portland, back when Horizon was just her, a business loan, and a vision for what hospitality could be if it started with respect instead of status. Somewhere along the way, that vision had fractured, and tonight she had seen exactly where the cracks were. By morning, the footage had spread beyond Sienna's channel and Jace's stream. It was on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Reddit. News outlets picked it up. Think pieces appeared. Horizon. Accountability trended for 6 hours. The Seattle property's Google reviews plummeted overnight, filled with one-star ratings and furious commentary. But buried in the avalanche of outrage were other stories. Guests who had been overlooked, ignored, dismissed. People who had walked into a Horizon hotel and been treated like they didn't matter. One review stood out. "I'm a nurse. I work 12-hour shift. After a particularly brutal week, I saved up and booked a weekend at the Horizon Grand Seattle. I showed up in scrubs because I came straight from the hospital. The front desk staff looked at me like I was lost. They asked if I was sure I had the right hotel. They made me show 3 forms of ID before they'd give me a key. I was so embarrassed I almost left. I didn't say anything because I thought maybe I was being too sensitive. But after seeing that video, I realized it wasn't just me. There were dozens more like it. Hundreds. Stories that had been whispered in private, dismissed as isolated incidents, or simply swallowed because fighting back felt too exhausting." Nyla read every single one. At 5:47 a.m., there was a knock on the penthouse door. Nyla opened it to find Richard Calloway standing in the hallway, holding a thick folder and a laptop. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie slightly loosened. "6 a.m., he said. "As requested." Nyla stepped aside and let him in. He set the folder on the dining table and opened the laptop, his fingers moving quickly across the keys. "I pulled every complaint filed at this property in the last 3 years, he said. "Guest complaints, employee complaints, maintenance requests, accessibility issues. Cross-referenced them with resolution reports." He paused, his jaw tightening. "And I found something." Nyla leaned forward. "Show me." Richard turned the laptop toward her. The screen displayed a spreadsheet with hundreds of rows, dates, complaint types, employee names, resolution statuses, but one column stood out, a filter marked escalated to regional. "Out of 412 complaints filed in the last 3 years, Richard said quietly, only 63 were escalated to me. The rest were marked as resolved at property level." Nyla's eyes narrowed. Who marked them resolved? Richard clicked a filter, and the spreadsheet reorganized itself. One name appeared over and over again in the resolution column. Graham Voss. Nyla leaned back, her expression unreadable. "He was burying complaints." "It looks that way," Richard said. "I started going through the flagged entries. Most of them are minor. Lost items, noise complaints, billing errors. But some of them..." He clicked to a new tab, and a different list appeared. "These are the ones that should have been escalated immediately." Nyla scanned the list. Her stomach tightened. Guest reported racial slur from front desk staff. Resolution. Misunderstanding addressed internally. Guest in wheelchair reported inaccessible room despite reservation. Resolution. Guest relocated, no further action needed. Employee reported harassment from manager. Resolution. Counseling provided, matter closed. There were 23 entries like this, 23 complaints that had been dismissed, minimized, or buried under bureaucratic language designed to make them disappear. Who else knew about this? Nyla asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Richard hesitated. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Nyla stood and walked to the window. The city was waking up, cars moving through the streets, lights coming on in office buildings, people beginning their days unaware that a reckoning was unfolding 23 floors above them. Graham Voss didn't do this alone, she said. Someone taught him that this was acceptable. Someone showed him how to bury complaints without consequences. She turned to face Richard. I want to know who. Richard's face was grim. I'll start with the previous regional director. He retired 2 years ago, but I can pull his records. Do it, Nyla said. And Richard? Yes, ma'am? If you find anyone else who knew about this and stayed silent, I want them gone. I don't care how long they've been with the company or how good their numbers are. If they protected this behavior, they're complicit. Richard nodded. Understood. He gathered his folder and laptop and left, the door closing softly behind him. Neela stood alone in the suite, her mind racing. This wasn't just about Graham Voss anymore. It wasn't just about one manager who let his biases dictate his behavior. This was about a system that had allowed him to operate unchecked for years, a culture that valued efficiency over accountability, a structure that made it easier to bury problems than solve them. She had built Horizon Hotels to be different, to be better. And somewhere along the way, it had become exactly the kind of place she had sworn it would never be. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up and saw a message from Maya. Saw the footage. Saw the reviews. You're going to fix this, right? Neela typed back. Already started. Maya replied immediately. Good, because if you don't, I will. Nyla smiled despite everything. Her sister was a civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking on institutions that thought they were untouchable. If Nyla failed to clean house, Maya would do it for her, and she wouldn't be gentle about it. Another message came through, this one from Daniel. Task force assembled. Legal is drafting new complaint protocols. HR is reviewing termination procedures for employees involved in suppressing reports. We're also putting together a reinstatement review process for anyone who was pushed out unfairly. This is going to take time, but we're on it. Nyla set the phone down and walked to the mirror in the bedroom. She looked at herself, still in jeans and a t-shirt, still wearing the clothes that had made 3 people decide she didn't deserve basic human decency. She had dressed this way on purpose. She had walked into her own hotel unannounced because she wanted to see what happened when no one knew who she was. She had suspected there were problems. She hadn't expected to find rot this deep, but now that she had, there was no going back. Downstairs, Marisol Vega sat behind the front desk, a cup of coffee cooling beside her keyboard, her eyes scanning the day's reservations. The lobby was quieter than usual. Some guests had checked out early, unnerved by the previous night's events. Others had stayed, drawn by morbid curiosity or genuine interest in what would happen next. A woman in her 60s approached the desk, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her expression kind but cautious. Good morning, Marisol said, summoning a smile. How can I help you? The woman hesitated. I'm checking out today, room 614. Marisol pulled up the reservation. Mrs. Caldwell, I hope your stay was comfortable. Mrs. Caldwell glanced around the lobby, then leaned closer. Can I ask you something? Of course. Were you the one who stood up to that manager last night? The one who told the truth about the reservation? Marisol's hands stilled on the keyboard. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Caldwell reached across the desk and squeezed Marisol's hand briefly. Thank you, she said. It took courage. Marisol's throat tightened. I just didn't want to be part of it. Most people would have stayed quiet, Mrs. Caldwell said. You didn't. That matters. She released Marisol's hand and stepped back. I'll be recommending this hotel to my friends, not because of what happened last night, but because of what you did. She turned and walked toward the exit, her suitcase rolling behind her. Marisol sat frozen for a moment, her heart pounding. Then she exhaled slowly and returned to her work. The phone at the front desk rang. She answered it. Horizon Grand Seattle, this is Marisol speaking. This is Nyla Grant, the voice on the other end said. I need you to assemble your front desk team for a meeting at noon, conference room B. Attendance is mandatory. Marisol straightened. Yes, Ms. Grant, I'll make sure everyone's there. Good, Nyla said. And Marisol? Yes, ma'am. Bring the complaint log. All of it. The line went dead. Marisol set the phone down, her pulse racing. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew it was going to be big. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that the Horizon Grand Seattle was about to change in ways no one could predict. By 11:45, conference room B was filled with tension thick enough to choke on. 8 front desk staff members sat around the polished table, their hands folded, their faces pale, their eyes darting toward the door every few seconds, as if expecting an executioner to walk through. Marisol sat at the head of the table with the complaint log open on her laptop, her stomach twisted into knots. She had spent the morning combing through 3 years of records, and what she had found made her sick. The door opened at exactly noon. Nyla Grant entered wearing dark slacks and a crisp white blouse, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. Behind her came Daniel Reese, a tall man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a leather portfolio tucked under his arm, and Richard Calloway, who looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. They took seats across from the staff, and the room fell into absolute silence. Nyla let the silence stretch. She looked at each person individually, studying their faces, reading their discomfort. Finally, she spoke. My name is Nyla Grant. I'm the founder and CEO of Horizon Hotels. Most of you have probably never seen me in person before yesterday. Some of you watched me get humiliated in your lobby. Some of you said nothing. One of you spoke up. Her gaze landed on Marisol for a brief moment, then moved on. We're here because this hotel has a problem, and I need to know how deep it goes. A young man at the far end of the table, Marcus Chen, 26, hired 8 months ago, raised his hand tentatively. Ms. Grant, I just want to say that what happened yesterday was wrong. I wasn't working that shift, but if you had been, would you have said something? Nyla interrupted. Or would you have stayed quiet like everyone else has been doing for 3 years? Marcus's mouth closed. Nyla leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. I'm going to ask you all a question, and I want honest answers. No deflection, no excuses, just the truth. She paused. How many of you have witnessed a guest being treated poorly because of how they looked, how they dressed, or the color of their skin? No one moved. Raise your hand, Nyla said, her voice calm but unyielding. Right now. Slowly, hesitantly, 5 hands went up. Then a 6th. Then Marcus raised his as well, his face flushed with shame. 7 out of 8. Nyla nodded as if she had expected this. How many of you reported what you saw? The hands dropped. Every single one. Nyla sat back in her chair, and the weight of that silence pressed down on the room like a physical force. So you saw it. You knew it was wrong, and you stayed silent. She looked at Marisol. Except for one person. Marisol swallowed hard. I tried to report things before yesterday. Complaints from guests who felt dismissed. Comments from staff that made me uncomfortable. But every time I brought it to Mr. Voss, he told me I was overreacting, that I needed to focus on my own job and stop looking for problems. And you believed him? Daniel asked, his tone neutral but probing. No, Marisol said quietly, but I didn't know what else to do. He was my supervisor. I thought if I kept pushing, I'd lose my job. Nyla's expression softened, just a fraction. That's what abusive systems rely on. Fear. The belief that speaking up costs more than staying silent. She turned to the rest of the staff. But here's the truth. Silence has a cost too. It costs people their dignity, their safety, their trust. And eventually, it costs you your integrity. A woman in her early 30s, Jessica Tran, front desk supervisor, 6 years with the company, spoke up, her voice trembling. Ms. Grant, I need to tell you something. About a year ago, a guest filed a complaint. She was a black woman traveling with her daughter. They had a reservation for a deluxe room, but when they checked in, Mr. Voss told them the room wasn't available and offered them a standard room instead. The guest insisted she had confirmed the reservation 2 weeks prior. Mr. Voss said there must have been a system error and that she could either take the standard room or leave. Nyla's eyes narrowed. What happened? She took the standard room, Jessica said. But the next day I was cleaning up paperwork and I saw the original reservation. The deluxe room had never been unavailable. Mr. Voss had manually reassigned it to another guest, who checked in an hour later, a white couple he knew from the golf club. The room went dead silent. Did you report this? Daniel asked. Jessica's voice broke. I tried. I brought it to Mr. Voss and told him I thought there had been a mistake. He said I must have misread the system. He said if I kept making accusations, he'd have to write me up for insubordination. She looked at Nyla, tears welling in her eyes. I'm sorry. I should have gone over his head. I should have done something. Nyla's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. What was the guest's name? Jessica opened her laptop and pulled up the file. Shanice Monroe. She left a review afterward. 1 star. She said she felt unwelcome and discriminated against. Mr. Voss marked the complaint as guest expectations not aligned with property standards and closed it. Nyla turned to Daniel. Find Shanice Monroe. I want her contacted personally. Apology, full refund, complimentary stay. And I want her to know that the people responsible are gone. Daniel made a note. Consider it done. Nyla looked back at the staff. Anyone else? Another hand went up. A man in his late 20s with nervous energy radiating off him. Tyler Brooks, night shift clerk. There was an incident about 6 months ago. A guest in a wheelchair checked in. His reservation specified an accessible room. When he arrived, the room wasn't ready. Mr. Voss told him he'd have to wait or take a standard room on the 3rd floor. The guest explained that he couldn't use stairs and that he'd specifically requested accessibility accommodations. Mr. Voss said the elevator was good enough and that we couldn't be expected to cater to every special need. Nyla's expression turned to ice. What did you do? I upgraded him to a suite on the 1st floor without charging him, Tyler said quickly. I didn't ask permission. I just did it. Mr. Voss found out the next day and wrote me up for unauthorized upgrades. He said if it happened again, I'd be terminated. So you stopped helping people, Nyla said flatly. Tyler looked down at his hands. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Nyla stood and walked to the window, her back to the room. The city stretched out below, indifferent to the reckoning unfolding in a conference room on the 4th floor. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter but no less intense. Graham Voss didn't act alone. He had help. He had a system that protected him. And he had people who stayed silent because they were afraid. She turned to face them. I'm not here to punish you for being afraid. I'm here to make sure you never have to be afraid again. Richard cleared his throat. Ms. Grant, I've been reviewing the records from the previous regional director. His name was Thomas Hargrove. He retired 2 years ago, but before he left, he implemented a policy that gave property managers more autonomy over complaint resolution. The idea was to reduce bureaucracy and handle issues locally. But in practice, it gave people like Graham Voss the power to bury anything they wanted, Nyla finished. Where's Hargrove now? Consulting for a competitor, Richard said. Grandview Hotels. Neela's eyes flashed. Get me everything you have on his tenure, every policy he implemented, every complaint that was dismissed under his watch. I want to know if this goes deeper than Seattle. She turned back to the staff. Here's what's going to happen. Effective immediately, this property is under direct oversight. Every complaint, every incident, every guest interaction that feels even slightly off gets reported to a new compliance team that answers directly to corporate. No more local resolution, no more buried paperwork, transparency, or termination. Those are your options. Marcus spoke up hesitantly. What about training? I mean, some of us genuinely didn't know what to do. We weren't taught how to handle these situations. That's going to change, Daniel said, opening his portfolio. We're implementing a company-wide training overhaul, bias awareness, conflict de-escalation, guest advocacy. And it's not going to be a one-time seminar you sleep through. It's going to be ongoing, evaluated, and tied to your performance reviews. Nyla added, and we're bringing in external auditors, people who have no loyalty to this company and no reason to protect anyone. They're going to interview staff, review records, and talk to guests. If they find more buried complaints or evidence of discrimination, there will be consequences. Jessica raised her hand. Ms. Grant, what happens to us? Are we all under investigation? You're all under review, Nyla said. But here's the difference. If you cooperate, if you tell the truth, if you help us rebuild this place into what it should have been from the start, you have a future here. If you lie, if you cover for anyone, if you try to minimize what happened, you're done. She let that sink in. I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in accountability. She gestured to Marisol. Show them the complaint log. Marisol turned her laptop screen toward the group and pulled up the spreadsheet. Row after row of dismissed complaints, buried incidents, and falsified resolutions scrolled past. The staff stared in silence, the color draining from several faces. This is what we're fixing, Nyla said. Every single one of these complaints is being reopened. Every guest who was dismissed is being contacted. Every employee who was punished for doing the right thing is being reinstated or compensated. And every person who contributed to this culture is going to answer for it. Tyler spoke quietly. What about the guests who never complained? The ones who just left and never came back? That's the part that keeps me up at night, Nyla admitted. Because for every complaint that was filed, there are probably 10 more people who didn't bother. They just decided we weren't worth their time or their trust, and I don't know how to fix that except to prove day by day that we've changed. Richard stood and addressed the staff. Starting tomorrow, we're implementing a new feedback system, anonymous reporting for staff, direct complaint pipeline for guests, and every week this team is going to meet and review what's been reported. No filters, no gatekeepers, just honesty. Nyla walked back to the table and placed both hands on the surface, leaning forward. I need to know right now if anyone in this room has information they haven't shared yet, incidents you witnessed, complaints you heard about, anything that might come out later and blindside us. Because if I find out someone stayed quiet and this happens again, there won't be a second conversation. There will just be a termination letter. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then a young woman at the far end of the table, Claire Mendoza, 23, front desk clerk for 14 months, raised her hand with a trembling motion. I know something, she whispered. Every head turned toward her. Claire's voice shook. About 3 months ago, there was a guest. Middle Eastern man traveling alone. He checked in late at night. The next morning, Mr. Voss called the police and said there was a suspicious person in the hotel. He told them the guest had been acting erratically and that he was concerned about safety. The police came, questioned the guest in the lobby in front of everyone, searched his room. They didn't find anything. The guest checked out immediately and threatened to sue. Mr. Voss settled with him privately, paid him off and made him sign an NDA. The room erupted in murmurs. Daniel's pen froze mid-note. Richard's face went ashen. Nyla's voice cut through the noise like a blade. How do you know this? Claire's eyes filled with tears. Because I was working the front desk that night. The guest wasn't acting erratically. He was just tired. He asked for extra towels and a wake-up call. That was it. But Mr. Voss saw him praying in the lobby before going to his room and decided he was a threat. After the police left and the guest checked out, Mr. Voss called me into his office and told me that if I ever mentioned what happened, he'd make sure I never worked in hospitality again. Nyla closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, they burned with cold fury. Do you remember the guest's name? Claire nodded and pulled out her phone. I took a photo of the reservation before Mr. Voss deleted it from the system. I didn't know what else to do. I was terrified, but I thought maybe someday someone would need proof. She turned her phone toward Nyla. The screen showed a reservation confirmation for a man named Tariq Hassan. Daniel immediately began typing on his laptop. I'm flagging this for legal right now. If there's an NDA, we need to void it and reach out to Mr. Hassan immediately. Nyla looked at Claire, and her voice softened. You did the right thing by keeping that photo. You may have just saved this company from a lawsuit we deserve to lose. She straightened. And you're never going to be threatened like that again. Not here. Not anywhere. Claire wiped her eyes, nodding wordlessly. Nyla turned to the rest of the group. Anyone else? No one spoke, but the atmosphere had shifted. The fear was still there, But something else had emerged, something fragile but real. Hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. Nyla walked to the door, then paused and looked back. I'm not going to pretend this is easy. Changing a culture that's been broken for years doesn't happen overnight. There will be hard conversations. There will be people who resist. There will be mistakes. She held their gazes one by one. But if you're willing to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem, I'll fight for you. And if you're not, then you need to leave now, because I will not tolerate another day of this. She opened the door and walked out, Daniel and Richard following close behind. The staff sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Then Jessica spoke, her voice hoarse. What do we do now? Marisol closed her laptop and stood. We do our jobs, but we do them the right way, the way we should have been doing them all along. One by one, the staff filed out of the conference room, their faces marked with exhaustion and something that might have been determination. Upstairs in the penthouse suite, Nyla stood at the window with her phone pressed to her ear. On the other end of the line, her sister Maya's voice was sharp and urgent. You're telling me there was racial profiling, disability discrimination, and someone literally called the cops on a guest for praying? Neela, this isn't just a PR crisis. This is a civil rights lawsuit waiting to happen. I know, Neela said quietly. That's why I'm handling it now before it gets worse. It's already worse, Maya said. You need a legal team on this immediately, and you need to start thinking about how you're going to make this right for the people who were harmed. Refunds and apologies aren't going to cut it. I'm working on it, Nyla said. Daniel's coordinating with legal. We're reaching out to every guest who filed a complaint. We're reopening cases that were closed improperly, and we're implementing new oversight protocols across every property. Good, Maya said. But Nyla, you need to understand something. The public is watching. If you don't follow through, if this turns into another corporate apology tour with no real change, you're going to lose everything you built. I know. Do you? Maya's voice softened slightly. Because I know you. I know how much this company means to you, and I know you're going to want to protect it, but you can't protect it by protecting the people who broke it. Nyla's throat tightened. I'm not protecting anyone. I'm trying to fix this. Then fix it all the way, Maya said. Don't stop at the obvious targets. Dig deeper. Find out who else knew, who else stayed silent, who else benefited from this system. And when you find them, don't hesitate. I won't, Nyla promised. Good, Maya said, because if you do, I'm coming up there to burn it down myself. Despite everything, Nyla smiled. I believe you. She ended the call and set her phone on the counter. The city lights were beginning to glow as evening approached, and somewhere in those streets were people whose lives had been touched by the failures of this hotel. People who had been dismissed, humiliated, profiled, and erased by a system that valued appearances over humanity. Neela had spent 15 years building Horizon Hotels into a brand that stood for something. Now she had to prove that what it stood for was worth believing in. Her phone buzzed with an incoming email. The subject line read, Preliminary Audit Results, Flagged Properties. She opened it and scanned the contents. Her stomach sank. Seattle wasn't the only property with buried complaints. There were flags at the Portland location, the San Francisco property, and the Denver hotel. Not as severe as Seattle, but present, consistent, systemic. Daniel had included a note at the bottom. We need to talk, tonight. Neela grabbed her jacket and headed for the door. As she stepped into the hallway, she caught her reflection in the mirror near the elevator, still the same woman who had walked into this hotel in jeans and a t-shirt, still the same person who had been told she didn't belong. But now she knew exactly how deep the rot went, and she wasn't going to stop until she'd cut out every last piece of it. The elevator descended in silence, carrying Nyla toward a meeting she knew would redefine everything she had built. Daniel had reserved a private conference room on the second floor, away from guest traffic, away from prying eyes. When the doors opened, she found him already waiting in the hallway, his expression grim. How bad is it? Nyla asked without preamble. Daniel gestured toward the conference room door. Bad enough that we need to talk before you see the full report. They entered a windowless room lit by recessed lighting, the walls lined with soundproofing panels that made every word feel heavy and final. A laptop sat open on the table, its screen displaying a spreadsheet that made the Seattle complaint log look like a rough draft. Daniel closed the door and locked it. "I've spent the last 6 hours on calls with property managers across the network," he said, his voice tight. "Portland, San Francisco, Denver, Phoenix. I asked them the same questions you asked the Seattle staff. I told them there would be consequences for lying and consequences for covering up. And once they understood I was serious, they started talking." Neela sat down slowly, her hands folded on the table. "Tell me." Daniel turned the laptop toward her and pulled up a document titled Company-Wide Compliance Review, Preliminary Findings. He clicked through tabs as he spoke, each one worse than the last. Portland had 17 complaints in the last 2 years that were marked resolved but never actually addressed. Most involved guests being questioned about their ability to pay, being asked for multiple forms of ID when policy only requires one, or being told rooms weren't available when the system showed otherwise. The pattern matches Seattle almost exactly. Nyla's jaw tightened. Who was burying them? The front desk manager, Lauren Chi. She's been with us for 6 years, promoted 3 years ago by Thomas Hargrove. The name landed like a punch. Hargrove again. Daniel nodded. It gets worse. San Francisco had a complaint from a transgender guest who was repeatedly misgendered by staff despite correcting them multiple times. She asked to speak to a manager. The manager told her that customer comfort required staff to use biological terms, and that if she had a problem with it, she should consider staying elsewhere. Nyla's hands curled into fists. Please tell me that manager is gone. As of 2 hours ago, Daniel confirmed. But here's the thing. The complaint was filed 8 months ago. It was escalated to the regional director, who forwarded it to Hargrove for guidance. Hargrove's response was to implement a staff training on managing difficult guests and close the file. He coached them on how to discriminate more carefully, Nyla said, her voice dangerous. Essentially, yes. Neela stood and paced to the far wall, her mind racing. What about Denver and Phoenix? Denver had accessibility issues similar to Seattle. Guests with disabilities being told their accommodations weren't available or being pressured to accept substandard alternatives. Phoenix had multiple incidents involving guests being profiled based on appearance. One was a veteran who came in wearing a service uniform and was accused of impersonating military personnel because the front desk clerk didn't believe someone like him could be a Marine. Nyla turned sharply. Someone like him? Daniel's expression was bleak. He was Latino. The clerk assumed he was lying. The room fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Nyla felt the full weight of it pressing down on her. Not just individual failures, not just bad employees, but a systemic rot that had spread through her company like poison in the water supply. How did this happen? She said quietly, more to herself than to Daniel. How did we hire these people? How did we promote them? How did we give them power and never notice what they were doing with it? Because Thomas Hargrove built a system that hid it, Daniel said. He gave property managers autonomy to resolve complaints locally, which sounds good on paper. Less bureaucracy, faster resolution. But what it actually did was create a wall between corporate and the properties. Complaints that should have reached you never did. Managers who should have been fired kept getting promoted, and the few employees who tried to speak up were silenced or pushed out. Neela walked back to the table and sat down heavily. Where is Hargrove now? Consulting for Grandview Hotels. I pulled his LinkedIn. He's advising them on operational efficiency and guest experience optimization. Daniel's voice dripped with contempt. Translation. He's teaching them the same tricks he used here. Nyla's eyes narrowed. Get me his contact information, and get me the name of every employee he hired, every manager he promoted, and every policy he implemented. I want to know the full scope of his influence. Daniel made notes. There's one more thing. I found a pattern in the termination records. Over the last 3 years, 12 employees were let go for performance issues or cultural misalignment. I reached out to 6 of them. 4 responded. All of them told me the same story. They were fired after reporting discrimination or pushing back against managers who treated guests poorly. Nyla's stomach turned. We fired people for doing the right thing. Hargrove did, Daniel corrected gently. with the regional directors executing his orders. But yes, we lost good people because they refused to be complicit. Nyla stood again, unable to sit still. I want them contacted. All of them. Offer reinstatement, back pay, and a formal apology. If they don't want to come back, offer compensation and a reference letter that makes it clear they were wrongfully terminated. Already drafting the outreach, Daniel said. But Nyla, you need to prepare for the possibility that some of them won't want anything to do with us. We hurt them. We betrayed their trust. Money and apologies might not be enough. I know, Neela said, but I have to try. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a text from Richard Calloway. You need to see this, now. She showed the message to Daniel, who immediately stood. What now? They took the elevator back to the lobby, where Richard waited near the concierge desk with his tablet in hand. His face was pale, his mouth set in a grim line. We have a problem, he said, turning the tablet toward them. The screen displayed a news article from a Seattle-based journalist named Kendra Park, published 20 minutes ago. The headline read, Inside the Horizon. Hotel Scandal. Former employees speak out about years of discrimination and retaliation. Nyla's blood went cold. She skimmed the article quickly, her heart sinking with every paragraph. Kendra had interviewed 3 former employees, all people who had been terminated under Hargrove's tenure. They described a toxic culture where complaints were ignored, discriminatory behavior was normalized, and anyone who challenged the system was forced out. One former employee, a woman named Andrea Collins, was quoted extensively. I reported my manager for making racist comments about guests. I was told I was being too sensitive. 2 weeks later, I was written up for minor infractions I'd never been warned about before. A month after that, I was fired for not being a good fit. I loved that job. I believed in what Horizon was supposed to stand for. But the reality was nothing like the marketing. Another former employee, Marcus Liu, described being pressured to deny accommodations to a guest with a service dog because the manager claimed it was a fake, emotional support animal. When Marcus refused and helped the guest anyway, he was demoted and eventually pushed out. The article ended with a damning paragraph. Horizon Hotels has issued statements about accountability and reform, but former employees say the problems run deeper than one viral video. They say the company's leadership either didn't know or didn't care what was happening at the property level, and that either option represents a catastrophic failure. Nyla handed the tablet back to Richard, her expression unreadable. Is the journalist still taking calls? I can find out, Richard said. Do it, Nyla said. I want to talk to her, directly. Daniel frowned. Are you sure that's a good idea? Anything you say could end up in print. Good, Nyla said, because I'm not hiding from this. If she wants the truth, I'll give it to her. Richard made the call, spoke quietly for a moment, then handed his phone to Nyla. She'll talk to you now. Nyla took the phone and walked toward a quiet corner of the lobby. Ms. Park, this is Nyla Grant. Kendra's voice was sharp and professional. Ms. Grant, I wasn't expecting to hear from you directly. I read your article, Nyla said, and I want you to know that everything those former employees said is true. There was a pause on the other end. You're admitting it? I'm acknowledging it, Nyla corrected. There's a difference. Admitting implies I knew and did nothing. The truth is I didn't know the full extent of the problem until 2 days ago, but that doesn't absolve me. It was my responsibility to know, and I failed. Kendra's tone shifted slightly, cautious but intrigued. So what are you doing about it? I'm tearing the system apart and rebuilding it, Nyla said. I've terminated employees who engaged in discrimination. I've reopened every complaint that was improperly dismissed. I'm reaching out to every former employee who was wrongfully terminated, and I'm implementing new oversight protocols to make sure this never happens again. That sounds like a PR script, Kendra said bluntly. It's not, Nyla said, and I'll prove it to you. I'm inviting you to audit the process, full access. Interview anyone you want, review any records you want, write whatever you find. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to watch and hold me accountable. There was a long silence. Then Kendra said, You realize that could backfire spectacularly. If I find more problems, and I probably will, you're handing me the ammunition to destroy your company. I know, Nyla said, but I'd rather have you destroy it with the truth than let it survive built on lies. Kendra exhaled slowly. I'll think about it, but I'm not making any promises. That's all I'm asking, Nyla said. She ended the call and handed the phone back to Richard. Daniel shook his head. You just invited a journalist to investigate us from the inside. That's either brilliant or insane. Maybe both, Nyla admitted. But if we're going to rebuild trust, we can't do it behind closed doors. People need to see the mess. They need to see us cleaning it up. And they need to see that we're willing to be held accountable even when it's uncomfortable. Richard cleared his throat. Ms. Grant, there's something else. I've been reviewing Thomas Hargrove's employment records. He didn't just implement policies. He also influenced hiring decisions. A significant number of the managers currently in place were either hired by him or promoted based on his recommendations. Neela's eyes sharpened. How many? Across all properties? Approximately 40%. The number hit like a freight train. 40% of the management structure had been shaped by a man who had systematically protected discrimination and retaliated against anyone who challenged it. We need to evaluate every single one of them, Neela said, not just their performance metrics, their complaint histories, their staff turnover rates, how they handle conflict. I want to know who's continuing Hargrove's legacy and who's just trying to survive in a broken system. Daniel nodded. I'll coordinate with HR, but Nyla, this is going to take months, and it's going to be messy. Some of these managers have been with the company for years. They have relationships, allies. If we start purging them, we could face pushback. Let them push back, Nyla said. I'm not interested in protecting people who abuse their power. I'm interested in protecting the people they've been hurting. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from the legal team with the subject line, Tariq Hassan, response received. Nyla opened it and read quickly. Tariq Hassan, the guest who had been racially profiled and falsely reported to police, had responded to their outreach. His message was brief and pointed. I appreciate the apology, but words don't undo the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in front of a lobby full of people. If Horizon Hotels is serious about change, prove it with actions, not statements. He had included a list of demands, a public acknowledgement of what happened, a detailed explanation of what systemic changes were being implemented to prevent similar incidents, a donation to a civil rights organization in his name, and a commitment to third-party oversight of complaint resolution processes. Nyla read the list twice, then forwarded it to Daniel and the legal team with a single sentence. Accept all terms. Implement immediately. Daniel's phone buzzed. He read the message and looked up at Nyla with surprise. You're agreeing to everything? He's right, Nyla said. Words aren't enough. If we're going to prove we've changed, we need to put our money and our policies where our mouth is. She turned to Richard. I want a statement drafted tonight. Public acknowledgement of what happened to Mr. Hassan, what happened in Seattle, and what we're finding in the audit. No spin, no corporate language, just the truth. Richard hesitated. Ms. Grant, the board is going to have concerns about legal liability. The board can have all the concerns they want, Nyla interrupted, but I'm the majority shareholder and the founder, and I'm telling you to draft the statement. If they have a problem with it, they can call me directly. Richard nodded and walked away, already typing on his phone. Daniel moved closer, lowering his voice. Are you sure about this? Once you make a public statement acknowledging systemic problems, you're opening the door to lawsuits, lots of them. I know, Nyla said. But staying silent would be worse. We've already lost the trust of the people who matter most, our guests and our employees. If we don't earn it back with transparency and action, we don't deserve to survive. Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'm with you. But we're going to need more than statements and apologies. We're going to need structural change. I know, Nyla said. Which is why tomorrow morning I'm calling an emergency board meeting, and I'm going to propose something they're not going to like. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What? I'm stepping down as CEO, Nyla said. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Daniel stared at her. What are you talking about? I'm not leaving the company, Nyla clarified, but I'm removing myself from day-to-day operations and creating a new oversight position, Chief Accountability Officer, someone external, someone with a background in civil rights or social justice, someone who reports directly to the board and has the authority to investigate, audit, and override management decisions if they conflict with our values. Daniel's expression shifted from shock to understanding. You're building a check on your own power. I'm building a system that doesn't rely on one person to do the right thing, Neela said. Because clearly, I didn't know what was happening in my own company, and if I didn't know, I can't be the only safeguard against it happening again. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The board is going to fight you on this. They'll say it's an overreaction, that it undermines confidence. Then I'll remind them that the alternative is watching this company collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy," Neela said. "I didn't build Horizon Hotels to be just another luxury brand. I built it to be better. And if it's not better, then it doesn't deserve to exist." She walked back toward the elevators, her mind already racing ahead to the next steps. As the doors closed, she caught her reflection in the mirrored walls. Still the same woman who had walked into this lobby 2 days ago, but carrying a weight that felt both crushing and clarifying. Upstairs in the penthouse, Neela sat at the dining table with her laptop open, drafting the framework for a new accountability structure. She outlined reporting mechanisms, third-party audit requirements, employee protection protocols, and mandatory training standards. She detailed consequences for violations and timelines for implementation. She wrote until her eyes burned and her hands ached. At 3 a.m, her phone rang. It was Maya. "Tell me you're sleeping," Maya said. "Not yet," Neela admitted. "Neela, you can't fix this alone. You need to let other people help." "I'm trying," Neela said, "but every time I think I've found the bottom, I discover there's another layer underneath." Maya's voice softened. "That's what happens when you're willing to actually look. Most people aren't. Most people stop at the easy answers and move on. You're digging deeper because you care, but you can't dig forever without collapsing." Neela leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. "What if it's not enough? What if we implement all these changes and people still don't trust us?" "Then you keep going anyway," Maya said. "Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. It's rebuilt through consistency, through showing up even when it's hard, through proving that the changes are real and permanent, not just damage control." "I invited a journalist to audit the whole process," Neela said. Maya laughed, surprised. "Of course you did. That's either genius or career suicide." "That's what Daniel said." "Well, for what it's worth, I think it's the right move," Maya said. "Transparency is your only weapon right now. Use it." They talked for another 20 minutes, and by the time Neela hung up, she felt steadier. Not confident. She wasn't sure she'd ever feel confident about this again, but steady enough to keep going. At 6 a.m., she sent the final draft of the accountability framework to Daniel and the legal team. At 7, she sent a meeting request to the board for an emergency session that afternoon. At 8, she received a response from Kendra Park. "I'll take you up on the audit, but I'm bringing a team, and we're going deep." Neela typed back, "Good, that's exactly what we need." She closed her laptop and walked to the window. The city was waking up below her, and somewhere in those streets were people who had been harmed by the failures of this company. People who deserved better. People who had been promised dignity and received humiliation instead. Neela pressed her palm against the glass, feeling the cool surface beneath her skin. She thought about the woman in the wheelchair who had been told the elevator was good enough, the man who had been profiled for praying in a lobby, the nurse who had been made to feel like she didn't belong, the veteran who had been accused of lying about his service. She thought about every person who had walked into a Horizon hotel hoping for respect and been given suspicion instead. And she made a promise, to them and to herself, that she would not stop until the system that failed them was completely dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up, even if it meant tearing apart everything she had built to do it. The emergency board meeting convened at 2 p.m. in a glass-walled conference room that overlooked Elliott Bay, the water glittering beneath a rare Seattle sun. 7 board members sat around the table, their expressions ranging from concerned to hostile. Neela stood at the head of the table with Daniel beside her, a presentation cued on the screen behind them. Board Chair Ellen Frost, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and a reputation for cutting through corporate nonsense, folded her hands on the table and spoke first. Nyla, we've all seen the footage. We've read the articles. And we've watched our stock price drop 6% in 48 hours. So before you present whatever plan you've prepared, I need to hear you say one thing. Do you understand the magnitude of what's happening here? Nyla met her gaze without flinching. I understand that we've failed people who trusted us. I understand that the systems I put in place were exploited by people I should never have empowered. And I understand that if we don't make fundamental changes right now, this company deserves to fail. The room went silent. A younger board member, Marcus Webb, a tech entrepreneur who had invested 2 years ago, leaned forward. That's a hell of a statement. Are you saying you're willing to tank the company to make a point? I'm saying the company is already tanking, Nyla said bluntly. And the only way to save it is to stop pretending this is a PR problem and start treating it like the institutional failure it is. She clicked to the first slide. It displayed the preliminary audit results, property by property, complaint by complaint, the full scope of what had been buried for years. This is what we're dealing with, Nyla said. Systemic discrimination across multiple properties, complaints that were dismissed or buried, employees who were retaliated against for speaking up, and a management structure that was deliberately designed to hide problems instead of solving them. Ellen's expression darkened as she scanned the data. How long has this been going on? At least 3 years, Daniel said. Possibly longer. We're still tracing the full timeline. Another board member, James Chen, a hospitality veteran with 30 years of experience, shook his head. How did we miss this? We have quarterly reviews, we have compliance audits. How did none of this surface? Because Thomas Hargrove built a system that prevented it from surfacing, Nyla said. She clicked to the next slide, which displayed Hargrove's organizational chart and the policies he had implemented. He gave property managers autonomy to resolve complaints locally, which meant complaints never reached corporate unless the manager wanted them to. He promoted people who followed his lead and pushed out people who questioned it. And he created a culture where silence was rewarded and accountability was punished. Ellen's jaw tightened. And we let him do it. We did, Nyla said, because the properties ran smoothly on paper. Revenue was good. Guest satisfaction scores were acceptable. We didn't look deeper because we didn't have a reason to. She paused. Until someone forced us to. Marcus spoke up again. So what's the solution? Fire everyone Hargrove hired, shut down the properties with the worst records, issue a public apology and hope people forget? No, Nyla said. The solution is structural change, real oversight, third-party accountability, and a complete rebuild of our complaint resolution system. She clicked to the next slide, which outlined the framework she had drafted the night before. I'm proposing the creation of a Chief Accountability Officer position, someone external with a background in civil rights or social justice. This person reports directly to the board, not to me. They have the authority to investigate any complaint, audit any property, and override management decisions if those decisions conflict with our values. The room erupted in murmurs. James raised his hand. You're proposing we bring in an outsider and give them veto power over operational decisions? I'm proposing we create a check on our own power, Nyla said, because clearly we can't be trusted to police ourselves. Ellen studied the slide carefully. Who would have this authority? What would the oversight structure look like? Daniel pulled up a supplementary document. We've identified 3 candidates, all with extensive backgrounds in civil rights law and organizational reform. The position would include quarterly audits of all properties, direct access to employee and guest feedback, and the power to initiate investigations without management approval. Any findings would be reported to the board and made public. Marcus's eyes widened. Made public? You want to air our failures for everyone to see? We're already doing that, Nyla said. The difference is whether we control the narrative by being transparent or whether we lose control by trying to hide it. Ellen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, What else? Nyla clicked through the remaining slides. We're implementing mandatory bias training for all staff, not as a one-time seminar, but as ongoing education with regular evaluations. We're creating an anonymous reporting system for employees to flag concerns without fear of retaliation. We're reopening every complaint that was improperly dismissed in the last 5 years and reaching out to affected guests with apologies, refunds, and explanations of what we're doing differently and we're contacting every employee who was wrongfully terminated under Hargrove's tenure and offering reinstatement or compensation." James whistled low. "That's going to cost millions." "It's going to cost what it costs," Nyla said, "because the alternative is losing everything." Another board member, Patricia Moore, a financial analyst, spoke up. "What about legal liability? If we acknowledge systemic problems, we're opening ourselves up to lawsuits." "We're already open to lawsuits," Daniel said. "The footage is public. The complaints are documented. The former employees are talking to journalists. The question isn't whether we'll face legal consequences. The question is whether we'll face them as a company that's trying to make things right or as a company that tried to cover it up and failed." Ellen leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Nyla, I have one more question. Why are you doing this? You could issue a standard apology, fire a few managers, implement some new policies, and move on. Most companies would. Why are you burning it all down instead?" Nyla met her gaze. "Because I walked into my own hotel 2 days ago and was treated like I didn't belong. And if that can happen to me, someone with power, resources, and the ability to fight back, then I know it's happening to people who don't have those things, people who just walk away and never come back, because it's easier than fighting a system designed to dismiss them." She paused. "I built this company because I believed hospitality could be different. If I'm wrong, then I'd rather tear it down and start over than let it keep hurting people." The room fell silent. Then Ellen nodded slowly. "All right, I'll support the accountability officer position, but I want quarterly reports, full transparency. And if this doesn't work, if we implement all these changes and the culture doesn't shift, I want your commitment that you'll step aside and let someone else lead the rebuild." Nyla didn't hesitate. "You have it." The vote was called. 6 in favor, 1 abstention. The motion passed. As the board members filed out, Ellen stopped beside Nyla. "You're either very brave or very foolish. I haven't decided which yet." "Maybe both," Nyla said. Ellen almost smiled. "Keep me updated. And Nyla, don't lose sight of why you're doing this. The minute this becomes about protecting the company instead of protecting people, you've already lost." Nyla nodded, and Ellen left. Daniel closed his laptop and looked at Nyla. "You just got board approval to dismantle half the management structure and bring in external oversight. That's either a miracle or the beginning of a corporate civil war." "Probably both," Nyla said, "but we're not stopping now." Over the next 72 hours, the transformation accelerated. Kendra Park and her investigative team arrived at the Seattle property with cameras, notebooks, and a list of people they wanted to interview. Nyla gave them full access. No restrictions, no handlers, no script. They interviewed Marisol, who spoke candidly about the culture of fear that had existed under Graham Voss. They interviewed Jessica Tran and Tyler Brooks, who described the mechanisms Voss had used to bury complaints. They interviewed guests who had been mistreated and former employees who had been pushed out. Kendra also interviewed Nyla herself in a 2-hour session that felt more like a deposition than a conversation. Nyla answered every question without deflection, acknowledging failures, outlining changes, and refusing to make promises she couldn't keep. "Why should anyone believe this is different from the last corporate scandal?" Kendra asked. "Why should anyone believe you're not just doing damage control?" "Because we're not asking people to believe us," Nyla said. "We're asking them to watch. We're putting oversight in place that doesn't depend on our good intentions. We're making our complaint processes public. We're inviting scrutiny instead of avoiding it. And if we fail, the evidence will be there for everyone to see." Kendra studied her for a long moment. "You realize that's a gamble. If this doesn't work, you won't be able to claim you tried. You'll have documented proof of failure." "I know," Nyla said, "but I'd rather fail transparently than succeed through silence." The article Kendra published a week later was brutal and fair in equal measure. She documented the scope of the failures, the testimonies of people who had been harmed, and the structural changes Horizon was implementing. She didn't pull punches, but she also didn't dismiss the effort. The headline read, "Horizon Hotels faces reckoning, but can corporate accountability actually work?" The response was mixed. Some people praised Nyla for transparency. Others accused her of performative activism. Former employees were divided, some cautiously hopeful, others deeply skeptical. Social media debated whether the changes were genuine or just sophisticated PR. But something else began to happen. Applications for the Chief Accountability Officer position flooded in, over 200 candidates within the first week, including civil rights attorneys, former government officials, and nonprofit leaders who had spent careers fighting institutional discrimination. The caliber of applicants made it clear that people believed the position was real and had real power. Employees at other properties began using the new anonymous reporting system, and the complaints that surfaced ranged from minor policy violations to serious concerns about management behavior. Each one was investigated, documented, and addressed publicly through internal updates that were shared across the entire company. Guests who had been harmed began responding to outreach efforts. Some accepted apologies and compensation. Others, like Tariq Hassan, engaged in deeper conversations about what meaningful change would look like. Tariq agreed to participate in staff training sessions, sharing his experience and helping employees understand the real-world impact of profiling and assumptions. Shanice Monroe, the woman whose room had been deliberately reassigned, initially declined all contact. Then, 3 weeks later, she sent an email to Nyla directly. It was brief. "I'm not ready to trust you yet, but I'm willing to watch what you do next." Nyla printed the email and pinned it to the wall of her temporary office in the Seattle property. It became a daily reminder of what was at stake. 2 months after the incident in the lobby, Nyla stood in conference room B once again, this time facing a much larger group. The room was packed with front desk staff, housekeepers, maintenance workers, managers, and corporate employees who had flown in from other properties. Marisol sat in the front row, her new role as front desk manager still feeling surreal but increasingly natural. At the front of the room stood Dr. Amara Okafor, a civil rights attorney with 2 decades of experience in organizational reform and a reputation for not tolerating half measures. She had been selected as Horizon's first Chief Accountability Officer after a rigorous interview process that had included input from employees, board members, and external consultants. Dr. Okafor was a tall woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a voice that commanded attention without needing to be loud. She addressed the room with the kind of clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. "I'm not here to make you comfortable," she said. "I'm here to make sure this company lives up to the values it claims to hold. That means I'll be watching, I'll be listening, and I'll be asking hard questions. If you're doing your job with integrity, we'll have no problems. If you're not, you won't last long." She paused, letting that sink in. "I've spent the last month reviewing complaint records, interviewing employees, and auditing processes across all properties. What I found is both encouraging and concerning. Encouraging because I see genuine effort to change. Concerning because change is fragile, and without constant vigilance, old patterns resurface." She clicked to a presentation slide that showed anonymized complaint data from the past 8 weeks. Since the new reporting system launched, we've received 147 complaints. Some are minor, miscommunications, policy clarifications. Others are serious, managers who haven't adjusted their behavior, staff who are still dismissive towards certain guests. Every single one has been addressed. 32 employees have received formal warnings. 8 have been terminated. The room was silent. "This isn't about punishment for its own sake," Dr. Okafor continued. "It's about accountability. If you see something wrong and you say nothing, you're part of the problem. If you participate in discrimination, actively or passively, you will be removed. But if you speak up, if you advocate for guests and colleagues, if you treat everyone with the dignity they deserve, you'll be supported." She looked directly at Marisol. "Ms. Vega, you were the only person in that lobby who told the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. That took courage. And because of your courage, we now have a standard. That's the standard I expect from everyone in this room." Marisol felt her throat tighten, but she nodded. Dr. Okafor clicked to the final slide. "I'll be conducting quarterly audits at every property. Unannounced visits, random interviews, direct observation of guest interactions. You won't know when I'm coming, but you should assume I'm always watching. Because, in a sense, I am, through the reporting system, through guest feedback, through the staff who are willing to hold each other accountable." She closed her presentation. "Questions?" A hand went up in the back. A housekeeper named Rosa Martinez who had worked at the property for 11 years. "What happens if we make a mistake, if we handle something wrong but we're trying to do better?" Dr. Okafor's expression softened slightly. Mistakes are different from malice. If you make a mistake and you own it, if you learn from it and change your behavior, that's growth. But if you make the same mistake repeatedly, or if you blame others instead of taking responsibility, that's a pattern. And patterns have consequences. Another hand went up, Marcus Chen from the front desk team. What about the managers who were hired by Hargrove? Are they all being investigated? Every manager across every property is being evaluated, Dr. Okafor said. Not just those hired by Hargrove. We're looking at complaint histories, staff turnover rates, how conflicts are handled, and whether they create environments where people feel safe speaking up. Those who pass the evaluation will stay. Those who don't will be transitioned out. A maintenance worker in his 40s, James Rodriguez, raised his hand. I've worked here for 9 years. I've seen things I didn't report because I didn't think anyone would care. I'm sorry for that. What can I do now? You can start by reporting what you see going forward, Dr. Okafor said. And if you have information about past incidents that were never addressed, you can share that with me directly. We're building a full historical record because we can't fix what we don't acknowledge. The questions continued for another 30 minutes. When the meeting finally ended, employees filed out in small groups, their conversations hushed, but animated. Some looked relieved. Others looked nervous. All of them understood that the ground had shifted beneath them, and there was no going back to the way things were. Nyla had watched the meeting from the back of the room, standing near the door. As Dr. Okafor gathered her materials, Nyla approached. "Thank you," Nyla said quietly. Dr. Okafor looked at her, and there was no warmth in her gaze, but there was respect. "Don't thank me yet. The real test comes 6 months from now when the cameras are gone and the headlines have moved on. That's when we'll see if this is sustainable or just a moment." "I know," Nyla said. "That's why I hired you." Dr. Okafor nodded. "Then let's make sure we're both still here 6 months from now, and the work is still getting done." She left, and Nyla stood alone in the empty conference room, feeling the weight of what had been set in motion. 6 months later, on a cold January morning, Nyla returned to the lobby of the Horizon Grand Seattle. She wore jeans and a t-shirt again, not as a test this time, but as a reminder. The lobby was busier than it had been that afternoon in late summer, filled with guests checking in and out, their voices blending into a low hum of activity. Marisol stood behind the front desk, her posture confident, her smile genuine. When she saw Nyla, she greeted her the way she would greet any guest. "Good morning. Welcome to the Horizon Grand. How can I help you today?" Nyla smiled. "Just checking in. Reservation under Nyla Grant." Marisol pulled up the reservation without hesitation, without suspicion, without a flicker of doubt. "Penthouse suite, 2 weeks. Everything's ready for you, Ms. Grant." She handed over the key card. "If you need anything during your stay, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you, Marisol," Nyla said. She walked toward the elevators, and as she passed through the lobby, she noticed small changes. A new sign near the concierge desk that read, "We welcome everyone. Come. If you experience anything less than respect during your stay, please report it directly to our accountability office." A diverse group of staff members working behind the desk, their interactions with guests warm and professional. A wheelchair-accessible check-in station that hadn't existed before. The changes were real. Not perfect. Dr. Okafor's quarterly reports had made that clear, but real. In the elevator, Nyla pressed the button for the 23rd floor and watched the doors close. She thought about the people whose voices had been silenced before that day in the lobby. The nurse in scrubs who had been made to feel unwelcome. The man in the wheelchair who had been told the elevator was enough. The veteran accused of lying. The guest who had been profiled for praying. She thought about the employees who had been pushed out for speaking up and the ones who had stayed silent out of fear. She thought about Marisol, who had risked everything to tell the truth, and Claire, who had kept evidence because she hoped someone would eventually care. The elevator doors opened on the 23rd floor, and Nyla walked to the penthouse suite. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The view hadn't changed. The city still sprawled below, glittering and indifferent. But something else had changed. The company she had built no longer operated on trust alone. It operated on systems designed to catch failures before they became crises. It operated with oversight that didn't depend on good intentions. It operated with the understanding that respect wasn't something you earned through status or appearance. It was something every person deserved the moment they walked through the door. Neela set her bag down and walked to the window. She pulled out her phone and opened an email from Shanice Monroe, sent earlier that morning. I stayed at the Horizon Grand Portland last weekend. It was different. Not perfect, but different. The staff listened when I had a question. They didn't make me prove I belonged. I'm not ready to call it fixed, but I'm willing to say it's changing. Thank you for not giving up. Nyla read the message 3 times, then saved it. Her phone buzzed with another notification. A message from Dr. Okafor. Audit complete for Q4. Issues flagged at Denver property. Manager creating hostile environment for LGBTQ+ staff. Termination proceedings initiated. Also flagged, San Francisco showing significant improvement. Portland needs follow-up on accessibility protocols. Full report attached. Nyla opened the report and scanned the findings. There were still problems. There would always be problems. But now there were also mechanisms to address them. People empowered to speak up, and consequences for those who didn't. She walked back to the window and looked out at the city one more time. Somewhere in those streets were people who had been harmed by the company she built. People who had every right to never trust Horizon Hotels again. But there were also people like Mrs. Caldwell, who had thanked Marisol for having courage. People like Tariq Hassan, who had agreed to help train staff so others wouldn't experience what he had. People like Shanice Monroe, who were willing to give the company another chance because the changes were visible and documented. Nyla didn't know if it would be enough. She didn't know if 6 months of progress could undo 3 years of failures. She didn't know if the systems they had built would survive the inevitable pressures to cut corners and prioritize profit over principle. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not stop fighting to make sure they did. Because respect wasn't a policy, it was a practice. And practices required constant effort, constant vigilance, and constant willingness to acknowledge when you failed and do better the next time. The Horizon. Grand Seattle still stood, its marble lobby gleaming, its staff working, its guests coming and going. But it was no longer the same building Nyla had walked into 6 months ago. It was something being rebuilt, floor by floor, policy by policy, interaction by interaction. And that rebuilding would never truly be finished, but it would continue. Because the woman who founded it had learned the hardest lesson leadership could teach, that the measure of a company wasn't how it treated people when everyone was watching, but how it treated them when no one thought they mattered. And from that day forward, Horizon Hotels would operate as if everyone mattered, not because it was good for business, though it was, not because it prevented lawsuits, though it did, but because it was the right thing to do. And in the end, that was the only reason that mattered.